I stopped by my wife's office, hoping to surprise her with flowers. But while I was waiting by her desk, something caught my eye, something all too familiar. It was a heavy, silver fountain pen. It was the exact custom-engraved pen I had commissioned for my daughter 8 months ago, right before she mysteriously vanished. My hands began to shake as I picked it up. I twisted the cap, a nervous habit I'd always had. But instead of the nib appearing, a heavy, mechanical click echoed through the room. The massive oak bookshelf behind her desk shuddered and began to slide open. What I saw inside that hidden room stopped my heart cold. My daughter was sitting on a bare mattress, chained to the frame, looking absolutely terrified. If you're listening to this story right now, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. My name is Harrison Cole. I'm 70 years old. I've spent the better part of my adult life building a massive logistics empire here in Chicago. I started with nothing but a rusted delivery truck, working 18-hour days until I turned it into a fleet of 400 heavy-duty trucks dominating the East Coast. But when your world is torn apart by tragedy, all the money and power in the world mean nothing. 8 months ago, my 28-year-old daughter, Maya, disappeared. She was my only child from my first marriage, my entire world. The police found a note in her apartment. They told me she had slipped back into old habits, couldn't handle the pressure, and decided to end her life, leaving behind a heartbroken father. I refused to believe it. I spent millions hiring the best private investigators, chasing every shadow, desperate for even a glimmer of truth. But every lead went nowhere. The nights were the hardest. I would sit in my empty house, staring at her photos, feeling a hollow ache in my chest that just wouldn't fade. During this waking nightmare, my only pillar of support was Victoria. Victoria is my 48-year-old second wife. She is elegant, poised, and throughout my grief, she seemed to give me endless support. She even started a non-profit called the Maya Hope Foundation, dedicated to helping young people struggling with addiction. I truly thought she was my savior. I thought she was the only person keeping me from losing my mind. I had no idea I was sleeping next to a monster. It was a quiet Friday afternoon, and I decided to leave the office early. Victoria worked late every night at the Foundation's headquarters, pouring her heart and soul into the Foundation's upcoming gala. I wanted to show my appreciation and remind her how much I loved her. I bought a huge bouquet of her favorite white lilies and drove across town to surprise her. When I arrived at the Foundation's office, the receptionist gave me a warm smile. She told me Victoria was in the basement archives pulling some old donor files and would be right back. I told the receptionist not to announce me. I wanted to surprise my wife and maybe take her out for a nice dinner. I walked into Victoria's corner office. It was spotless, a perfect reflection of her personality. The room was bathed in warm afternoon sunlight, with huge windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. I placed the lilies gently on the edge of her neat mahogany desk. I took a deep breath, looking around, feeling a rare moment of peace. That's when I saw it. Tucked away under a stack of folders next to her keyboard tray was a heavy, silver fountain pen. My lungs felt like they had been drained of air. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. Engraved in elegant cursive on the polished metal was Maya's name. This was the pen I had customized for her 25th birthday. Maya took it everywhere. The police report clearly stated that she took all her personal belongings when she disappeared. In the name of heaven, why would Victoria have it just sitting on her desk? My mind raced, desperately trying to find a logical explanation. Did the police find it and give it back to her? Did Victoria find it while cleaning out Maya's old room? But she had never mentioned it to me. She knew how painful every item belonging to my daughter was for me. I held the cold metal in my palm, feeling a sickening weight in my stomach. Maya had a nervous habit. Whenever she was deep in thought, she would twist the cap of her pen. Without realizing what I was doing, my thumb and forefinger mimicked that exact motion. I twisted the heavy silver cap. It didn't unscrew smoothly. Instead, a sharp, heavy mechanical click sounded from deep within the pen. It was a remote trigger. A low, muffled thud vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. I stumbled back in shock as the massive oak bookshelf behind Victoria's desk began to shudder. With a low, hydraulic hum, the entire wall began to slide open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor hidden right behind the office. The air that drifted out was stale, cold, and smelled of harsh chemical cleaners. I let go, and the pen hit the floor with a crisp clatter. I stepped into that hidden space, my blood roaring in my ears so loudly I could barely hear myself breathe. At the end of the short, dim corridor was a reinforced, soundproof glass cell. Inside, sitting on a bare, stained mattress, was a frail, emaciated figure. Her clothes hung loosely off a skeletal frame. A heavy metal chain connected her pale ankle to the steel bed frame. She slowly raised her head, shielding her eyes from the light spilling in from the main office. My heart stopped. It was Maya, my beautiful, vibrant daughter. She was alive, but she looked completely broken. Her eyes, sunken into her cheeks, went wide with sheer, absolute terror when she recognized me standing at the doorway. She scrambled to her feet, rushed to the thick glass and began pounding on it with bruised hands. Although the heavy soundproofing muffled her voice completely, I could read her trembling lips perfectly. "Daddy, run." Before my brain could even begin to process the mind-shattering horror that my daughter was locked in a cage inside my wife's office, a sound from the main corridor froze me in place. It was the sharp, unmistakable click of Victoria's designer heels approaching the door. And next to her was the heavy, thumping tread of Damien, her massive, intimidating security guard. They were laughing about something. They were only seconds away from walking through that door. I was unarmed. I am a 70-year-old man. If they saw me standing there, if they realized I had discovered their terrifying secret, neither Maya nor I would make it out of that building alive. I had to make the hardest decision of my life in a split second. My fingers moved purely on instinct. I grabbed the heavy silver cap of the fountain pen and twisted it back into place. The sharp mechanical click sounded again, louder this time, or so it felt to my panicked brain. The massive oak bookshelf groaned and began to slide shut. I watched the gap narrow, my eyes locked on Maya's terrified, hollowed face until the very last possible moment. Just as the brass doorknob of the main office began to turn, the solid wood door clicked shut. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, and grabbed the large bouquet of white lilies from the mahogany desk. I forced my posture to slump. I let my shoulders drop. I commanded my shaking hands to show the vulnerability of a heartbroken, grieving 70-year-old man, not the absolute terror of a father who had just seen his missing child locked in a cage. The door opened. Victoria walked in. She was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. Her hair was meticulously styled, and her expression wore a mask of pristine, professional grace. Right behind her was Damien. He was massive, like a mountain, and his custom suit could barely hide his thick, muscular build, the build of a professional enforcer. He scanned the room with a cold, predatory gaze, then stepped back to stand guard at the door. Victoria stopped dead in her tracks, clearly surprised to see me standing by her desk. A flicker of brief, barely perceptible panic crossed her face, but she recovered with terrifying speed. Her expression melted into a soft, compassionate smile. "Harrison, darling," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "What are you doing here? You should have told my assistant you were waiting for me." I stepped forward, forcing my hands to shake just enough to sell the illusion. "I brought you these," I muttered, offering the white lilies. "I know how hard you've been working for the gala, and I just wanted to surprise you and tell you how much I appreciate everything you're doing to honor Maya." When I said my daughter's name, bile rose in my throat. I wanted to reach out and end her right there. I wanted to command Damien to move and tear that wall down with my own hands. But I held onto my frail, trembling facade. Victoria reached out to take the flowers, raised them to her nose and closed her eyes. "Oh, Harrison, they're beautiful. You're so thoughtful, but you really should be resting at home. The doctor said your stress levels are dangerously high." She placed her manicured hand on my arm, stroking my sleeve gently. Her touch made my skin crawl. It took every ounce of my willpower not to pull away. Just as I opened my mouth to answer, a sound interrupted us. Thump. It was a heavy, dull noise coming directly from behind the oak bookshelf. It was a desperate, muffled strike against the thick glass of the hidden cell. Maya, my beautiful girl, was trying to signal me. She was trying to call out for her father. Damien immediately tensed, his hand sliding dangerously toward the inside of his jacket. Victoria didn't even blink. Her smile remained perfectly fixed on her face, even though the hand clutching my arm tightened just a little. "What was that sound?" I asked, letting my voice quiver. I stared blankly at the bookshelf, perfectly playing the part of a confused, disoriented old man. I heard a noise behind the wall. "Is someone in there?" Victoria let out a soft, condescending sigh. She stood directly between me and the bookshelf, completely blocking my view. "Oh, darling, it's just the pipes in this old building. The pipes bang and rattle all day long. I've told the building manager a dozen times to fix the water pressure." Thump. Another muffled strike. My heart was bleeding, knowing the pain my daughter was enduring just a few inches away. I looked at Victoria, eyes wide, feigning distress. "It sounded like someone knocking," I whispered, clutching my chest. "Victoria, what if it's her? What if it's Maya trying to reach us?" Victoria pulled me into a tight hug, pressing my face into her shoulder so I couldn't look at the wall. Damien relaxed slightly, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Harrison, please," Victoria murmured, patting my back soothingly. "You're letting grief cloud your reason again. Dr. Evans warned us about this. He said if you don't take your sedatives on time, extreme exhaustion can lead to auditory hallucinations. You're hearing things because you miss her so much. We all miss her, but you have to stay grounded in reality." She stepped back and looked deep into my eyes. Her expression was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was gaslighting me with flawless precision, using my supposed grief to deny my own reality. I forced a tear to roll down my cheek. I nodded slowly, letting my shoulders slump even lower. "You're right," I said hoarsely, wiping my eyes with the back of a trembling hand. "I'm sorry. I just keep hoping she'll walk through that door. I just want my little girl back. I'm losing it, Victoria. I really am." The glint of satisfaction in her eyes was sickening. She fully believed she had me completely under her thumb. She believed I was just a senile, pathetic old fool, completely blind to the monster standing in front of him. "You aren't losing it, darling," she assured me, her voice smooth as silk. "You're just a loving father who has been through an unimaginable tragedy. That is exactly why I work so tirelessly here. In fact, I just finished a meeting with the board. I signed a check for $100,000 to open a new wing at the Youth Rehabilitation Center. We're going to name it after Maya. In her memory, we're going to save many young lives." Every word she spoke was like a calculated knife in my chest. She was using my daughter's tragedy, a tragedy she had orchestrated herself, to funnel my money into her own twisted schemes. "That's wonderful, Victoria," I managed to say, my voice filled with fake emotion. "Maya would be so proud of you. I'm proud of you. I need to go home. I need to lie down. My chest feels tight." Victoria kissed my cheek. "Damien will walk you to your car. Harrison, please take your medication and get some rest. I'll be home as soon as I finish filing these donor reports." I nodded meekly and turned to walk toward the door. Every step away from that bookshelf felt like walking on broken glass. I was leaving my daughter in that dark, cold cage. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to fight, to tear that room apart. But the cold, rational part of my brain, the part that had built a logistics empire from scratch, knew that acting on impulse would be a fatal mistake. If I confronted them now, Damien would just pull his weapon and end me. If I had confronted them, Damien would have ended me right there, hidden my body in that secret room, and then finished off Maya. Victoria would have spun a tragic story about a grieving father who finally cracked under the pressure and took his own life. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway, with Damien trailing silently just 2 paces behind. I kept my gait slow and unsteady all the way to the elevator. I stepped inside, hit the button for the lobby, and kept my head down until the metal doors slid shut, sealing me away from that enforcer. The moment the elevator began its descent, the mask vanished. My trembling hands clenched into tight fists. My slumped shoulders straightened. The tears dried up, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I stepped out of the building and into the crisp Chicago air. The afternoon sunlight felt completely different now. The world had fundamentally changed. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, locked the doors, and sat in the quiet, isolated cabin. My breathing turned into heavy, ragged gasps. I gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I knew I couldn't just call the police. A tactical raid on a fortified building takes time to organize. If patrol cars screeched up with sirens blaring, Victoria would know she was exposed. She would have a contingency plan. She would order Damien to silence the only witness. By the time the authorities breached that hidden room, my daughter would be gone. I couldn't take that risk. I needed a flawless strategy. I needed to know exactly why my wife had locked my daughter in a secret cell instead of just holding her for ransom. I needed to uncover the financial trigger she was patiently waiting for. I started the engine, my mind racing through thousands of different scenarios. Victoria thought she was dealing with a frail, oblivious old man. She thought my grief had blinded me to her deception. She had no idea she had just awakened a predator. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward my vast, empty estate. The fury burning in my chest crystallized into a deadly, singular focus. I intended to dismantle her entire life, piece by piece, and bring my daughter home. My estate's massive wrought iron gates swung open, and I drove up the long, winding driveway. The gravel crunched under my tires, a familiar sound that usually brought me a sense of comfort. Today, it sounded like teeth grinding. I parked in the garage, killed the engine, and sat for a few minutes in the dead, heavy silence. I needed to focus. I had to bury the image of Maya shivering in that glass cage deep within my mind, locking it away where Victoria couldn't see it. When I finally stepped out of the car and walked through the heavy front door, the frail, broken old man returned to the surface. But beneath my skin, my blood was ice cold. As I crossed the threshold into the privacy of my study, I dropped the grieving facade. For 40 years, I had built a logistics empire by seeing things others missed. I had crushed ruthless competitors by predicting their moves and destroying their supply chains before they even knew they were under attack. My business instincts, dulled by the suffocating fog of grief, suddenly roared back to life with a cruel, predatory focus. I was no longer a grieving father crying over old photos. I was a CEO facing a hostile takeover, and the enemy was sleeping in my bed. I sat behind the mahogany desk and began to dissect Victoria in my mind. If I was going to beat her, I needed to understand her daily life, her habits, and every anomaly I had previously ignored. The clues had been there all along, hiding in plain sight, obscured by her overwhelming devotion and sweet smiles. I just needed to look at them through the eyes of a man who knew his wife was a kidnapper. The first glaring contradiction hit me almost immediately. Lunch, For the past 6 months, Victoria had insisted on packing her own meals for the office. At the time, I thought it was just a quirky, humble habit. Maria, our housekeeper, was an excellent cook who prepared all our meals. Yet every morning, Victoria would politely but firmly shoo Maria out of the kitchen. Victoria claimed she preferred simple salads and turkey sandwiches, and she always packed 2 identical brown paper bags. She told me the second bag was for her young, overworked intern, who she claimed never had time to eat. I had praised her generosity. Now, the memory of those 2 bags made my stomach churn. One bag was for Victoria. The other, the identical sandwich and salad, was the fuel keeping my daughter barely alive in that freezing basement cell. The care Victoria took to ensure Maria never saw inside those bags wasn't humility. It was operational security. She couldn't risk the housekeeper noticing the strict caloric rationing. Then came the second anomaly, something far more sinister and aggressive. For the past 3 months, Victoria had been gently but relentlessly pushing me to sign a document for full medical and financial power of attorney. At first, it was just a soft suggestion over breakfast. She would hold my hand, looking at me with those compassionate eyes, telling me how worried she was about my deteriorating health. She would bring up moments where I forgot a simple appointment or misplaced my keys, weaponizing the natural brain fog of my grief to construct a narrative of severe cognitive decline. Just last week, she brought a slick, fast-talking lawyer to the house. Not my lawyer, not the firm that handled my company affairs, but a stranger she had found. He placed a thick stack of papers on our dining table. Victoria poured me a cup of tea, whispering that it was just a precaution. A way to protect my legacy so I could focus entirely on healing. She wanted complete, uncontested control over my personal property, assets, and medical decisions. I delayed signing, telling her I wanted my legal team to review the wording. A flicker of brief anger flashed across her face, instantly replaced by a loving smile, but now it all made sense. She was setting the stage to declare me legally incompetent. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the ceiling, fitting the puzzle pieces together. I was facing a highly sophisticated predator with a deep-seated antisocial personality. But one vital piece of the equation was still missing: the motive. This wasn't a standard ransom kidnapping. In a traditional kidnapping, the criminal grabs the victim, sends a photo proving they're alive, and demands a wire transfer or a bag of unmarked bills. They want quick cash and a fast exit. But Victoria had kept Maya in a custom-built, soundproof bunker for 8 long, grueling months. She had gone to the trouble of faking a suicide note and staging a relapse, watching me spend millions on private investigators while she comforted me in my own bed. This was a long con, a carefully orchestrated, long-term operation. If she just wanted my money, she could have divorced me and taken half my wealth in the settlement. If she wanted the entire empire, she could have waited for me to sign that power of attorney and then quietly slipped a lethal dose into my evening tea. But she hadn't. She kept Maya alive. Why? Why take the risk of housing and hiding a hostage for nearly a year? The answer hit me like a physical blow. She needed Maya alive for a specific purpose, something she couldn't forge, steal, or manipulate out of me. I closed my eyes, running through every financial asset, trust fund, and corporate holding in my portfolio. What did Maya have that Victoria needed? What financial trigger required my daughter to keep breathing? Victoria was waiting for an event. She was keeping Maya in that cell, feeding her scraps, waiting for a specific date or a specific authorization that only Maya could provide. Once she had it, once she secured whatever she was waiting for, Maya would no longer be useful. Victoria would dispose of her and then execute the medical power of attorney to control me. I opened my eyes and stared at the locked safe in the corner of my study. I needed to go through my own financial records. I needed to audit my own life with the cold precision of a forensic accountant. Somewhere in those thousands of pages of legal documents and bank statements lay the exact reason my daughter was chained to a bed. I had to find that trigger. I had to figure out her endgame before she reached it. I stood up, walked to the safe, and began to dial the combination. I was going to find out exactly what my wife was trying to steal, and then I was going to burn her world to the ground. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed twice, its deep resonance echoing through the dead silence of the estate. It was 2:00 a.m. I had been sitting in the dark for hours, motionless, listening to the house sleep. Upstairs, Victoria was sound asleep in our master bedroom. She had come home after 9, kissed my cheek, and brought me warm milk and a strong sedative, playing the part of the devoted wife perfectly. I took the pill, tucked it under my tongue, and the moment she turned away, I flushed it down the bathroom sink. The house was as silent as a grave. It was time to work. I stood up and walked silently across the thick Persian rug. My joints ached, a sharp reminder of my 70 years, but adrenaline pushed the physical pain into the background. I moved down the long hallway toward my private home office. I knew every inch of this massive house. I knew which floorboard would creak and which one would remain silent. Victoria thought she controlled this environment, but she was just a newcomer in my world. I reached the heavy oak door, inserted the key into the brass lock, and turned it as slowly as possible to prevent a loud click from the mechanism. The door opened and I slipped inside, closing it tight behind me. The room was pitch black. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I walked straight to the desk and booted up my main computer. The monitor flickered to life, casting a pale blue glow across my face. Almost immediately, the screen was filled with a prompt. It was a complex security application requiring an authentication token. Victoria had installed it 2 months ago. She claimed it was a necessary upgrade recommended by her consultants to protect my personal wealth from overseas hackers. She spun a harrowing tale about a friend of hers whose portfolio was drained overnight. I nodded, playing the grateful husband, and allowed her to install the software. She controlled the admin password. She believed she had locked me out of my own digital life, but Victoria severely underestimated the man she was married to. I didn't build a multinational logistics empire by trusting the keys to the kingdom to third-party vendors. The day after she installed her shiny firewall, I had my CTO quietly install a mirrored backdoor access protocol deep within the motherboard registry. It was completely invisible to her software. I bypassed the login screen with a sequence of keystrokes she knew nothing about. The security wall dissolved and I was in. The digital vault of my entire life lay open before me. I bypassed my domestic accounts, connected through an encrypted VPN, and dove straight into my overseas corporate holdings. My business structure was a labyrinth of shell companies, holding groups, and diversified investments spanning 5 continents. It was designed to be impenetrable to both competitors and tax auditors, but tonight I was auditing myself. I pulled up the transaction logs from the past 8 months, specifically filtering for the period after Maya disappeared. I looked for routing errors, blocked transfers, and denied access requests. For 20 minutes, the screen showed nothing but routine corporate maintenance. I dug deeper, accessing legacy files, and then I found it. Buried beneath the data layers of the holding company was a series of desperate, frantic digital breadcrumbs. It was a sequence of access requests from an IP address registered to the Maya Hope Foundation. Victoria had been quietly trying to access a very specific, heavily protected offshore account. In the last 6 months, she had tried to breach it 14 times. Every attempt was met with an automatic, hard-coded rejection. I clicked on the account profile, and a wave of deep sadness washed over my cold rage. It was the Alessim Trust. It was a massive, impenetrable trust fund that my late first wife, Maya's mother, had set up shortly before she passed. She came from a family of old, quiet wealth, and she wanted to ensure our daughter would always be financially independent, completely insulated from the volatile swings of my logistics empire. The trust currently had a valuation just north of $80 million. For years, it had just sat there quietly, accruing interest. I hadn't thought about the LSM trust in a decade, mainly because I had absolutely no legal right to access it. My first wife had structured it with aggressive foresight, employing a team of ruthless estate lawyers to ensure the money belonged solely to Maya. I opened the core charter document of the trust, scanning the dense legalese to find exactly what was preventing Victoria from draining it. The conditions were draconian. The first release clause stated that the full $80 million principal would automatically transfer to Maya's personal control on her 30th birthday. Maya was currently 28. That meant Victoria had a 2-year waiting period before the funds technically became liquid. But if Maya were legally declared dead, the money would automatically revert to a designated charitable foundation chosen by the trust executor, bypassing me entirely. Victoria couldn't just kill Maya and take the money. That explained why she faked the suicide note and staged a disappearance instead of confirming a death. It takes 7 years for a missing person to be legally declared dead. I scrolled down further, my eyes stinging from the reflection on the screen, until I found the second release clause. It was an emergency liquidation agreement. My first wife had worried that Maya might suddenly need a large sum of money before she turned 30 due to a medical emergency or a critical business venture. The trust could be liquidated immediately, bypassing the age restriction, but the security measures were absolute. It required a verified, real-time biometric signature from the sole beneficiary. Not a password, not forged documents. The bank required a real-time, synchronized upload of Maya's fingerprints and a retinal scan through a proprietary terminal provided by the trust manager. As this horrific reality finally clicked into place, the words on the screen blurred. The last piece of the puzzle locked into position, painting a picture so dark and depraved that my blood ran cold. This was the chilling reason my daughter was still breathing. Victoria wasn't keeping Maya locked in that soundproof glass cage out of some twisted mercy. She wasn't feeding her scraps to keep her alive out of guilt. She needed her alive to provide biometric data. She was keeping Maya in cold storage, breaking her spirit, starving her down to skin and bone, and conditioning her through absolute terror so that when the time came, Maya would be too weak to resist. The moment I signed that new medical power of attorney, Victoria would request that proprietary terminal, force my emaciated daughter to scan her eyes, and then perfectly execute her without leaving a single trace behind. I slowly closed the heavy laptop, my suffocating grief entirely replaced by a cold, deadly, relentless, calculating rage. I intended to systematically burn Victoria's fake world to the ground, and I wouldn't stop until I brought my daughter home. The sun was just beginning to bleed through the heavy curtains of my study, casting long, pale shadows across the room. I sat motionless, staring at the black screen of the laptop. The digital trail I had just uncovered painted a terrifying picture. Victoria was absolutely not just a simple, greedy opportunist. She was a meticulous, cold-blooded architect of suffering. She had built an invisible death row cell for my only child, and she was waiting for me to hand her the executioner's switch. My first instinct, the visceral reaction of a terrified father, was to dial 911. I wanted to send an army of police cruisers smashing through the glass doors of that foundation. I wanted to hear the deafening wail of sirens and see a tactical squad in full gear kicking down the walls. I wanted to see Victoria dragged out in handcuffs, screaming as they tore her precious foundation to pieces. I wanted the world to witness the absolute monster hiding behind her flawless charitable facade. But the cold, rational logic I had relied on to build my logistics empire instantly crushed that impulse. A routine police raid would undoubtedly be a swift and brutal death sentence for my beloved daughter. I couldn't let that happen. Victoria and Damien were deeply entrenched. If they heard a single siren or saw a flicker of emergency lights, Damien would execute Maya before the authorities even breached the lobby. This was a highly unstable hostage situation controlled by a deadly kill switch. I needed a precise, surgical, and completely silent intervention. I needed professionals operating entirely outside the rigid, noisy boundaries of local law enforcement. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a burner phone. I kept a few for sensitive negotiations, but this call was a matter of life and death. I dialed the first number, knowing my life depended on it. John Prescott answered on the second ring. John was my corporate attorney, and his ruthlessness in Chicago was legendary. He had an icy demeanor and a razor-sharp mind. His loyalty to our family was absolute. I told him to cancel his appointments and wait for my instructions. Then I dialed the second number. Rex Carter was a retired Navy SEAL who ran an elite private security firm. We went back 20 years. When he came back from a deployment with nothing but a duffel bag and nowhere to go, I had bankrolled his company. When I told Rex I needed a ghost operation, he didn't ask a single question. I instructed both of these dangerous men to meet me immediately at an abandoned industrial park on the edge of town. We couldn't risk meeting at our usual spots. Victoria was capable of deep-level surveillance. I had to assume my spaces were already compromised. 2 hours later, a massive 18-wheeler from my fleet pulled silently up beside a dilapidated warehouse. The driver was an incredibly loyal employee who had been hauling freight for my company for over 30 years. He stood watch outside in the cold night air, vigilant. I climbed slowly into the dark, massive, windowless trailer. The heavy steel doors slammed shut, plunging the space into absolute darkness before the dim overhead LED lights flickered to life. This trailer had been modified for secure transport, its interior walls completely lined with soundproofing foam and electromagnetic shielding. It was a mobile fortress, completely off the grid. As the massive diesel engine rumbled to life, and the truck began to move toward the highway, maneuvering randomly through the dark city streets to avoid any possible tracking, I turned to the two men sitting at the metal folding table bolted to the cold steel floor. John Prescott sat bolt upright, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the industrial surroundings. Rex Carter leaned against the steel wall, dressed in dark tactical gear, arms crossed over his broad chest. Neither man complained about the bizarre meeting place. They simply waited in respectful silence for me to begin. I laid my hands flat on the cold metal table. I didn't waste time on pleasantries or emotional padding. I laid out the horrific reality in precise, chronological order. I told them about the hidden room behind the bookshelf in the Foundation office. I described the heavy chain, the thick, soundproof glass, and my daughter's emaciated, terrified face. I watched the color drain from John's face. I saw Rex's jaw tighten, his posture shifting from relaxed observation to a coiled, aggressive intensity. Then I laid out the sinister financial motive driving this nightmare. I explained the offshore accounts, the $80 million trust, and the terrifying biometric release clause that required Maya's live fingerprints and retinal scan. I watched them digest the cold, mathematical cruelty of Victoria's long game. She had kidnapped my daughter, faked a tragic relapse, and played the grieving, supportive wife, all to manipulate me into signing over power of attorney. Once she had my signature, she would force Maya to unlock the trust, and then she would make us both disappear without a trace. The trailer was silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of heavy tires on asphalt. These two battle-hardened men had never seen this level of calculated domestic depravity. John was the first to break the heavy silence. His voice was a harsh, raspy whisper as he vowed to dismantle Victoria legally until she begged for mercy. But Rex stepped forward and pulled a rugged tactical tablet from his gear bag. He placed it on the table, projecting a high-resolution digital floor plan of the Foundation headquarters. "I pulled the city's zoning records and the building blueprints while you were driving here," Rex said, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. "I filtered the data looking for structural anomalies or unrecorded renovations." He tapped the screen, zooming into the basement. Victoria filed a permit 14 months ago for soundproofing and structural reinforcement. She claimed the Foundation needed a secure archives room for sensitive donor data. But the materials she ordered don't match a simple archives room. She had hired a black market contractor, a crew known for building underground cartel hideouts. Rex drew a glowing red line on the digital map. The space behind her office is a fully functional panic room. The walls are reinforced with steel plate. It has a standalone, closed-loop air circulation system that isn't connected to the building's main network. That door is a bank vault-grade security gate. If she locks it from the inside, or if Damien barricades that hallway, we can't just kick the door down. Traditional explosive breaching charges would take too long and make way too much noise. They built an impenetrable fortress in the middle of the city. The reality of his words hung heavily in the cramped space of the trailer. We weren't just facing a kidnapping. We were facing a fortified, self-sustaining bunker. My daughter was trapped in a cold, steel grave breathing recycled air. And the woman holding the key was sleeping in my bed. I stared at the glowing floor plan, tracing the digital outline of my daughter's prison. We needed a flawless tactical plan to bypass those steel walls and complex locks tonight to save her life. Rex tapped the screen, closing the blueprints and opening a highly encrypted communications channel. He issued rapid-fire orders to his cyber warfare unit. Less than a mile from the Foundation headquarters, an inconspicuous plumbing repair van sat silently in a dark back alley. Inside, 3 elite digital experts were probing the invisible boundaries of Victoria's fortress. Rex explained that the panic room sat on a closed loop, completely disconnected from the building's main internet. However, the black market contractors had made one fatal, arrogant mistake. They had installed a wireless diagnostic port to monitor the independent air filtration system. It was a faint digital signal leaking through the concrete, but to Rex's team, it was an open door. We sat in the trailer, surrounded by the rumble of the diesel engine, staring at the blank tablet screen. The tension was so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Every passing second felt like an eternity. I imagined Maya sitting in that cold room, wondering if I had truly abandoned her, wondering if the moment she saw my face was just a cruel trick of her exhausted brain. I made a silent promise to her that I would return. I promised her I would unleash hell upon those who had put her in a cage. Rex stared intensely at the monitor. His experts were working to isolate that weak diagnostic signal, piggyback onto its frequency, and essentially pick the digital lock without triggering the automatic security protocols Victoria had undoubtedly paid a fortune to install. If they moved too fast, the system would detect the intrusion and send an immediate alert to Victoria's phone. If they moved too slow, we would lose precious time Maya simply didn't have. We watched lines of complex code scroll rapidly across the tablet, illuminating our grim faces. The experts were using custom decryption algorithms designed to mimic the normal background noise of the city. Then, the scrolling stopped. A flashing green light appeared in the center of the screen. "We're in," Rex whispered, his voice startlingly calm. Given the gravity of what they had just accomplished, bypassing an internal firewall and establishing a stable, undetected connection to the panic room's central hub. It was remarkable. Rex's thick fingers moved rapidly across the glass, browsing hidden network directories until he found the internal monitoring feed. He clicked a file icon labeled with a generic serial number, and the screen flickered, stabilizing into a high-definition, live video feed. I stopped breathing. The image on the screen looked directly into the darkest corner of my daughter's private hell. The camera was mounted in a high corner of the soundproof glass cell, providing a full view of the barren, clinical space. The walls were painted a harsh, stark white, designed to maximize psychological disorientation. No natural light, no sense of time, only the relentless, harsh glare of overhead fluorescent lights. And there, sitting on that thin, stained mattress, was Maya. She had her knees pulled tightly to her chest, thin arms wrapped around her legs in a desperate attempt to conserve body heat. The cold air pumped through that independent filtration system was designed to keep her weak, compliant, and docile. I watched her shivering violently, a constant, uncontrollable tremor shaking her frail frame. The heavy steel chain fixed to her ankle looked like a monster against her pale skin. Her beautiful face, the one I had kissed goodnight 1,000 times when she was a little girl, was sunken and bruised. Heavy, dark circles surrounded her eyes, painting a picture of profound sleep deprivation and absolute terror. I held my trembling finger inches above the digital screen, wanting to touch her face, wanting to shatter the glass separating us. A hot, stinging tear escaped my eye and slid down my cheek. I had built an empire. I had accumulated unimaginable wealth and power. I had employed thousands of people. Yet in this moment, looking at my broken child, I felt like the most complete failure on this earth. I had invited the monster into my home. I had bankrolled the foundation that served as her prison. I had paid for the bricks and steel that made up her cage. The guilt threatened to swallow me whole, the self-loathing almost bringing me to my knees like a dark tide. But I pushed it down. I converted every ounce of agonizing guilt into pure, unadulterated rage. I promised myself I would not shed another tear until Victoria was systematically and utterly destroyed. Just as I moved my hand away from the screen, John Prescott cleared his throat. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. He had been unusually quiet since I laid out the initial facts, his brilliant legal mind processing variables and analyzing the threat landscape. He placed the folder flat on the metal table, right next to the tablet displaying my shivering daughter. While Rex was confirming the visual on the hostage, I activated my most aggressive intelligence contacts to run a deep-dive background check on Victoria's shadow, John said, his voice deadly serious. The man she calls Damien. You thought he was just a hired thug, a musclehead she pulled from a private security firm to do her dirty work. You are catastrophically wrong. John opened the folder, revealing a series of grainy surveillance photos and heavily redacted federal documents. His real name isn't Damien, it's Mateo Vargas. He isn't a bodyguard. He is a high-level cleaner for a cartel operating south of the border. He is currently wanted by international authorities for orchestrating multiple extortion rackets and carrying out high-profile murders for a major crime syndicate based in Sinaloa. The air in the trailer seemed to evaporate. The gravity of the situation had just taken a violent turn. We weren't dealing with a greedy, antisocial wife executing a domestic financial crime. We were standing on the precipice of war with international organized crime. Victoria isn't just a woman trying to steal a trust fund, John continued, tapping the federal file. She has direct ties to a cartel network. Vargas isn't working for her. He is her handler. He is there to ensure the cartel gets whatever money she promised them. If we trigger an alarm, if we make one wrong move, Vargas will kill Maya without a second thought. and he is trained to disappear before the police even arrive. The stakes had just spiked into the stratosphere. My daughter wasn't just a pawn in a greedy divorce plot. She was collateral for a multi-million-dollar cartel debt. I looked back at the screen, at Maya shivering in the cold. I looked at Rex and John. I knew exactly what had to be done to save my daughter's life. The sun was just beginning to bleed red on the horizon when the 18-wheeler dropped me off near the estate. I slipped in through the side door the moment the automatic lawn sprinklers buzzed to life. My mind raced with the horrific reality of Mateo Vargas, but physically, I seamlessly retreated into the shell of the heartbroken widower. I climbed the grand staircase and entered the master suite. The sound of running water echoed from the suite's bathroom. Victoria was taking a morning shower, preparing for another day of playing the angelic philanthropist. Her designer handbag sat unattended on the vanity. I didn't have much time. Rex had given me a military-grade microtransmitter during the meeting in the truck. It was a flat, circular device, no bigger than a coin, wrapped in a specially designed adhesive casing meant to evade standard scanning equipment. I moved silently. My hands were perfectly steady. The trembling old man was entirely gone. I unzipped the gold clasp of the purse and slid my fingers deep into the custom silk lining. I found a hidden seam near the reinforced bottom, peeled back the tape, and pressed the transmitter firmly against the inner leather wall. It vanished. I snapped the clasp shut the moment the water in the bathroom stopped. I shuffled over to the vanity, slumped my shoulders, and picked up a photograph of Maya. When Victoria walked out wrapped in a plush white towel, wiping the steam from her eyes, she found me standing exactly where she expected. I stared blankly at the photo, the picture of a father's utter despair. She gave me a sympathetic sigh, kissed my cheek, and told me to get some rest. 1 hour later, I watched her car pull out of the driveway through the sheer curtains of my study. The moment her taillights disappeared past the iron gates, I locked the heavy study door and booted up my highly encrypted laptop. I plugged in the receiver dongle Rex had configured for me and slipped on a pair of noise-canceling headphones. The initial audio feed was a mess of fabric rustling and the low road noise of Victoria driving through the city. I sat at my desk, staring at the audio waveforms dancing on the monitor. I listened to her order coffee at a drive-thru. I listened to her cheerfully greet the foundation receptionist. Her public voice was sickeningly sweet, dripping with a practiced, fake warmth. She complimented an intern on her outfit. She discussed floral arrangements for the upcoming gala. It was all incredibly mundane and incredibly disgusting. I waited, listening with the patience of a sniper. The audio suddenly changed as a heavy door closed, followed by the distinct mechanical click of a deadbolt sliding into place. The surrounding background noise of the busy office vanished instantly. She had entered her private office, the room directly adjacent to my daughter's hidden cell. A second set of heavy footsteps echoed through the transmitter. It was a slow, deliberate pace. Victoria's public mask dropped the moment she was alone with Damien. "You're late," Victoria snapped. Her voice had lost all its melodic warmth. It was sharp, cold, and dripped with a coarse, impatient authority. "Traffic," the man replied. His voice, stripped of the silent bodyguard facade, sounded rough and jagged. It carried the heavy weight of a seasoned cartel enforcer. He sounded like a man merely tolerating Victoria because she was the key to a massive payday. "We don't have time for traffic." Victoria hissed. "I need you to recheck the acoustic seals on the perimeter walls." When the old man was standing by the bookshelf yesterday, I thought I heard a vibration. If he finds her in there before I get power of attorney, this entire operation falls apart. A heavy chair scraped across the floor. "The old man is a ghost," Vargas grunted dismissively. "He's so drugged up on sedatives he wouldn't notice his own shadow." "He isn't the problem, Victoria. You are the problem. My employers in the South are losing their patience. They didn't fund this little charity front and send me here to take a year-long vacation. They want their capital back, and they want the premium you promised. You guaranteed them this trust would be liquidated months ago. Victoria's breathing hitched, a microscopic display of fear that brought a cold sense of satisfaction to my dark heart. You know the strict protocol, she argued, her voice tight and defensive. The LSM trust is a nightmare to crack. I have to wait for the biometric trigger. I have to keep him grieving long enough to break his cognitive resistance. I can't just put a gun to his head and force him to sign for power of attorney. If the estate lawyers suspect coercion, they'll freeze everything and launch a massive federal investigation. It has to look like a completely voluntary transfer of medical and financial authority due to severe cognitive decline. Vargas slammed his hand onto the table, the sharp crack causing the audio waveform on my screen to spike violently into the red zone. They don't care about your legal inconveniences, Victoria, he roared, taking a step toward her. They care about the $80 million you promised them. I received a security message this morning. The grace period is officially over. You must complete the biometric transfer and wire the funds by the end of this weekend. If that money isn't sitting in their offshore account by midnight on Friday, they're cutting their losses. They've ordered me to clear the site. That means I put a bullet in that girl's head in the basement, I put a bullet in your head, and I burn this building to the ground. A suffocating silence followed his explicit threat. I gripped the edge of the mahogany desk until my knuckles ached. I was listening to a clear, non-negotiable order to execute my beautiful daughter. I don't need to wait until Friday, Victoria replied, her voice trembling slightly before hardening into a chilling, antisocial resolve. I have a solution ready. The private doctor I bribed finalized the medical documents yesterday evening. He officially drafted a diagnosis certifying that Harrison is suffering from severe, rapid-onset dementia and grave psychological instability. I am bringing the lawyer back to the estate tomorrow evening. I will drastically increase his sedative dosage tonight. By tomorrow, he won't even know what day it is. He will sign the power of attorney papers simply because I tell him it's a sympathy card for Maya. The moment I have absolute legal authority over his estate, I will bring the bank terminal here. We drag the girl out of the cell, force my emaciated daughter to open her eyes for the retinal scan, press her thumb to the glass, and trigger the emergency liquidation. I will have the money wired to the cartel within 48 hours. Vargas gave a begrudging grunt of approval. 48 hours, Victoria. Do not fail or we all die very ugly deaths. The audio signal cut out. I had 48 hours. The silence in the headphones lasted a full 3 minutes. I froze in my leather chair, hands gripping the armrests until my forearms cramped. My mind raced, calculating the brutal math of Victoria's timeline. 48 hours. 2 days to destroy a fortified cartel bunker and save my daughter from death. Just as I reach for the phone to alert Rex and John of this terrifying deadline, static hissed in my headphones. The micro-transmitter in Victoria's purse had reconnected. The thick, soundproof door of her office must have blocked the signal while Vargas was pacing near the door. Now, his heavy footsteps walked back to the center of the room. I pressed the headphones tight against my ears, desperate to catch every syllable. You need to be prepared for every variable, Vargas said, his rough voice vibrating with barely restrained hostility. The local police aren't a threat right now, but if the old man suddenly has a moment of clarity and calls them, or if a rogue patrol car spots my men doing perimeter checks, we have to move immediately. We cannot afford a standoff. We cannot afford hostage negotiations. The cartel doesn't negotiate, Victoria. We erase the problem and then we vanish. I am fully aware of the protocol, Mateo, Victoria replied, her tone dripping with arrogant confidence. That is exactly why I paid your black market contractors an extra $100,000 to install a fail-safe. I am not an amateur. I have been in control of this entire situation since day one. Then keep your tablet fully charged to prove it. Vargas snapped. I saw it sitting on your desk yesterday, and the battery indicator was blinking red. If that screen goes black, you lose your override access to the ventilation controls. If we get breached, if I have to draw my weapon and hold the door, you are the one who has to press the button. I couldn't manage to pull the trigger while also managing the software. My blood turned to ice, ventilation override, a button on a tablet. I closed my eyes, and the high-resolution blueprints Rex had shown me in the back of the moving truck flashed through my mind. The panic room had an independent, closed-loop air circulation system. Rex thought it was designed simply to keep the room self-sufficient during a prolonged siege. But Victoria had twisted it into an execution chamber. The tablet is plugged in right now, Victoria said, her voice laced with defensive anger. The app is running in the background. The signal to the basement terminal is rock solid. If someone tries to force their way into this building, if I hear even one siren, or if you give me the signal, I just open the app and tap the red icon. The system will instantly seal the intake valves, and carbon monoxide will flood the room. Vargas finished the sentence for her, his voice flat and cold. The pressurized tank is connected directly to the ventilation ducts. Once you tap that screen, the gas will displace the oxygen in the cell. It's colorless. It's odorless. The girl will feel sleepy. She will lie down on that mattress, and within 45 seconds she will be dead. There will be no screaming, no panic. By the time the tactical team manages to cut through the vault door, she will be gone and the gas will have dissipated through the vents. It will look exactly like she died from accidental suffocation due to a mechanical failure. I stopped breathing. 45 seconds. One light tap on a glass screen. My beautiful daughter, having endured 8 months of starvation and psychological torment, was currently sitting in a gas chamber. Victoria had built a lethal kill switched directly into the building's infrastructure. The sheer, antisocial brilliance of the trap was paralyzing. If I called the police, if a SWAT team arrived at the foundation with armored trucks and megaphones, Victoria would simply look out the window, flash that sweet, charitable smile of hers, and tap a button on her tablet. Maya would pass away quietly in the dark before the police even breached the lobby. Victoria would then play the part of the distraught victim, claiming she had absolutely no idea the cartel had been holding a hostage in her basement. When the time comes, make sure your hand doesn't shake, Vargas warned. You've played the grieving wife for so long, you might actually be starting to believe your own lies. When the order is given, you press the button, no hesitation. I won't hesitate, Victoria replied coldly. I don't care about the girl, I only care about the trust fund. Once the money hits the offshore account, she's just dead weight. I might even flush the room myself, just to be finished with all the whining. As they moved the conversation to banking logistics, the audio feed went quiet again, but I had heard enough. I ripped the headphones off and threw them onto the desk. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely unlock my phone. The mission parameters had just shifted from difficult to nearly impossible. A dynamic breach was completely off the table. We couldn't use explosives on the vault door. We couldn't use flashbangs. We couldn't even risk the sound of shattering glass or heavy footsteps in the hallway. If Victoria felt threatened for even a split second, she would reach for her tablet. If Vargas saw a shadow flash in the corridor, he would give the execution order. I dialed Rex Carter's secure line. He picked up instantly, the sound of keyboard clicks echoing from his security command center in the background. I relayed the new intel with surgical precision. I told him about the tablet. I told him about the carbon monoxide canister rigged to the ventilation ducts. I told him we had a maximum 45-second execution window from the moment Victoria touched that screen. A digital gas chamber, Rex muttered, his voice dropping an octave. That is a mix of old-school cartel brutality and high-tech home security. If we spook them, the girl is dead. The standard rules of hostage rescue are out the window. We cannot negotiate with a kill switch. We aren't negotiating with anyone, I replied, my voice colder than it had been in decades. We are eliminating the threat. I need a completely silent strike. We have to neutralize Victoria and that tablet, and we have to neutralize Mateo Vargas at the exact same moment. If Vargas goes down, Victoria might panic and hit the button. If we take the tablet, Vargas will draw his weapon and kill Maya himself. Simultaneous, invisible termination, Rex confirmed, the tactical gears in his mind already turning. My cyber team can try to jam the local network, but if the tablet is hardwired to the panic room grid, we have to cut the physical connection. We need eyes inside that office. Get your men in position immediately, I commanded. We are fighting a silent war today. The heavy steel walls of the moving trailer seemed to be closing in as the reality of my orders settled on the cold metal table. John Prescott leaned back in his folding chair, took off his expensive glasses, and pinched the bridge of his nose. He was a man who fought wars with injunctions, asset freezes, and corporate litigation, not firearms and tactical breaches. He looked at me, his brilliant legal mind struggling to reconcile the civilized corporate executive he'd known for decades with the cold commander sitting across from him. "Harrison," he began, his voice measured and highly cautious. "What you are suggesting is an unsanctioned, armed, illegal tactical assault on civilian property on U.S. soil. If this goes wrong, if the authorities find out a private militia stormed an office building downtown, the legal fallout will be catastrophic. You will be looking at charges of federal conspiracy, kidnapping, and domestic terrorism." I didn't even blink. I leaned across the cold table, my eyes locking onto his. "John," I replied, my voice dangerously calm, "my daughter has been locked in a soundproof box for 8 months. The woman I married intends to flush that box with carbon monoxide the second she gets my signature. I don't care about federal charges. I don't care about my corporate legacy, my stock price, or my pristine public reputation. If it takes every penny I've ever earned to bring Maya home, I will gladly burn my empire to the ground. There is no legal recourse here. There is only survival. Are you standing with me, or do I need to have the driver pull over and throw you out on the highway?" John looked at the digital blueprint of the panic room still glowing on Rex Carter's tactical tablet, then looked back at me. He slowly put his glasses back on. The professional, icy lawyer was back instantly. "I am with you, Harrison. I will draft a retroactive security authorization tonight. We will legally classify Rex's team as a high-threat extraction squad hired to recover stolen corporate assets. It won't stand up in federal court forever, but if the police show up after the smoke clears, it will buy us the confusion and the critical delay we need." Rex let out a deeply approving grunt, his thick arms resting heavily on the table. "Legal cover is fine, but the tactical reality is a nightmare," he said, tracing a finger across the digital floor plan. "Victoria's panic room is completely independent. If we cut the building's main power, her backup generators will kick in automatically, keeping the ventilation system and digital locks fully operational. If my men try to drill that vault door, the massive noise and vibration will alert Vargas instantly. He will draw his weapon. Victoria will click her screen and the gas will release. We can't simply sneak up on them. We have to completely eliminate their ability to communicate with that room before they even know they're under attack." Rex reached deep into his tactical bag and pulled out a heavy, cylindrical object, about the size of a large thermos. It was wrapped in matte black metal, covered in bright warning labels and manual activation switches. "This is a localized electromagnetic pulse generator, EMP," Rex explained, setting the heavy device safely on the table. "This is strictly military hardware. Civilian use is highly illegal. When my team detonates it, it will release a massive burst of high-energy electromagnetic energy that will instantly fry every unshielded microchip within a precise 50-foot radius. It will completely destroy Victoria's tablet. It will permanently fry the automatic ventilation override, the digital locks on the vault door, and Vargas's encrypted cellular comms. The kill switch will instantly turn into a brick. If the computer commanding the gas doesn't exist, the gas cannot be released." I stared at the black cylinder, marveling at the sheer destructive power resting on the folding table. It was the perfect silent solution to Victoria's digital guillotine, but a cruel realization followed. If the pulse fries the electronic lock on the vault door, the door defaults to the mechanical deadbolt, I reasoned, looking up at Rex. "Your elite team won't be able to open it by hacking the keypad. You'll have to manually breach the door." Rex nodded, a cold, highly respectful smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Exactly right. The EMP saves Maya from the lethal gas, but it instantly turns the panic room into a hermetically sealed steel vault. My men have hydraulic breaching tools to force those massive deadbolts, but those tools are incredibly bulky and slow. From the moment the pulse hits and the electronics die, my assault team will need a full 90 seconds to pry that steel door open. During those specific 90 seconds, Vargas will realize his comms are dead. He will know the power is cut. He will draw his weapon and hunt for targets with extreme aggression. "That is where I come in," I said, my voice absolutely resolute. "I will be his target. I am the Trojan horse." John shook his head instantly. "Harrison, absolutely not. You cannot be in that room. Vargas is a seasoned cartel cleaner. If he panics, he will shoot the first thing he sees." "I have to be in that room," I countered, laying my hands flat on the digital blueprints. "Victoria and Vargas need a compelling reason to leave the panic room, move away from Maya, and completely let their guard down. I am the only living person who can orchestrate this scene. Tomorrow morning, I will call Victoria. I will play the heartbroken, exhausted widower. I will tell her the suffocating grief has finally defeated me. I will agree to sign the medical power of attorney unconditionally and authorize the immediate transfer of the Alessum Trust, but I will explicitly insist that it be handled at the Foundation headquarters. I will tell her that before I exit public life forever. I have a desperate desire to see the place built in Maya's honor one last time." Rex leaned forward, fully analyzing the tactical strategy. "She won't be able to resist the bait. She is too hungry for that final signature. She will clear out the entire office staff. She wants absolute, uncontested privacy for the financial transaction. Vargas will be in the room supervising, disguised as her loyal security guard. You walk in, hand them the final victory, and keep their greedy eyes focused entirely on you." I nodded precisely, mapping out the specific movements in my mind. "I will sit at her large glass desk. I will demand a final, careful reading of these heavy documents. I will ask banal, ridiculous questions about the legal wording, intentionally wasting time, feeding her inflated vanity. I will make Victoria smug, and I will make Vargas deeply bored. I will draw their lethal attention entirely to myself, away from that dark hallway, away from that vault door. I will buy your tactical team the precious time they need to silently breach the perimeter and deploy the EMP device safely outside the main office." Rex tapped the table rhythmically. "Once my men are in the perfect position, I will send a vibration signal to the encrypted phone in your pocket. That is the final warning. You will have exactly 5 seconds to hit the floor, and then the massive pulse will detonate. When the EMP triggers, every light bulb in the building will shatter. Computer screens will explode violently. The electronic locks will instantly die. You will be plunged into absolute, disorienting darkness with a highly trained cartel hitman. My team will simultaneously detonate silent breaching charges on the main office door, but you have to survive those agonizing 90 seconds while we force our way in to permanently neutralize Vargas. I'm not afraid of the dark, I answered, staring blankly at the black cylinder. And I am certainly not afraid of Mateo Vargas. I have been living like a pathetic ghost for the last 8 months. Tomorrow afternoon, Victoria is going to find out exactly what happens when the ghost finally fights back. For the next hour, as the 18-wheeler continued its endless rumble through the serene night, we finalized the exact timing, primary entry points, and secondary retreat routes. The finalized plan was a massive, incredibly terrifying gamble. I was going to intentionally walk unarmed into a locked, soundproof room with an antisocial manipulator and an armed cartel hitman. I had to perform the best acting role of my life, playing the pathetic victim flawlessly while silently counting down the long seconds in my head, waiting for an electromagnetic storm that would plunge us all into absolute chaos. If my voice wavered even slightly, if Victoria sensed the hidden trap, or if Vargas saw the elite tactical team moving in the external hallway, Maya would die instantly. There was zero room for tactical error. I had exactly 90 seconds to successfully capture the devil's full attention, and I fully intended to use every second of it aggressively. When the 18-wheeler finally dropped me back at the estate, the sky was just beginning to be painted with bruised shades of purple and orange by the morning light. I slipped in through the side door just as the first rays of morning sun crawled through the slits of the heavy curtains. Victoria was still fast asleep, her breathing slow and rhythmic. I lay beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling, rehearsing the most important role of my life. When night fell, the spacious dining room felt like a grand theater stage, and I was the protagonist prepared for the final tragic act. Our housekeeper, Maria, served a quiet dinner of roast lamb and winter vegetables. The rich aroma filled the room, but my mouth was completely dry. Every bite I took felt like dry ash. Victoria sat across the long mahogany dining table, holding her wine glass with effortless grace. She wore a soft cashmere sweater, projecting the image of a comforting, fiercely loyal wife. She asked about my day, her voice dripping with artificial empathy, probing to see if my mind was deteriorating exactly as she had planned. I hunched my shoulders forward, allowing my hands to produce a visible tremor. I stared blankly at my plate, letting the crushing weight of the last 8 months physically manifest in my posture. "Victoria," I whispered, letting my voice crack amidst the despair I had meticulously manufactured. "I can't keep going." The sentence hung in the heavy silence of the dining room. She carefully set her wine glass on the table, leaned forward, and instantly displayed a meticulously calculated concern. "What do you mean, Harrison?" she asked softly. I slowly lifted my head to meet her gaze, my eyes intentionally rubbed red and puffy in the bathroom minutes prior. I forced a single heavy, painful tear to spill over my lower lid and slide down my cheek. "I'm so tired," I choked out, covering my face with trembling hands. "I'm too tired to run the logistics company. I'm too tired to fight with the board. Every time I sit at my desk, all I can see is Maya. Everything I've built, this entire massive corporate empire, was supposed to be hers. Now that she's gone, nothing feels like it has any meaning at all." Victoria rose from her chair, circled the long table with grace, and placed her warm hands on my trembling shoulders. She began to massage the tight muscles at the base of my neck. "You're just overcome with grief, darling," she whispered, planting a gentle kiss on the top of my head. "You need rest. You need to let go of this massive burden of the company." I reached up and grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly with a desperate, pathetic sense of dependency. That's exactly what I want to do, Victoria. I want to let it all go. I took a deep, shuddering breath, preparing to drop the final bait. Do you remember the LSM trust? I asked, my voice barely louder than a broken whisper. I felt her fingers instantly stiffen against my neck. It was a microscopic physiological reaction, a tiny spasm of electric-like anticipation, but to me, it felt like a thunderclap. I remember, she replied, keeping her tone impeccably neutral. That is the fund her mother set up for her. It has been locked in probate ever since she disappeared. It isn't locked in probate, I corrected, gently wiping the fake tears from my face. I have been secretly reviewing the original charter documents with my lead legal team. Because Maya has been missing for over 6 months, the trust executor has authorized an emergency transfer protocol. The fund currently holds just over $80 million in liquid assets. I want to transfer every cent of it directly under your absolute control. I turned my chair to look directly into her eyes. In the fraction of a second, the sweet, charitable mask shattered completely. I saw it. I saw the raw, unfiltered, predatory greed shimmering in her dark pupils. It was a terrifying, bottomless hunger, an antisocial ecstasy that the game of her long torment was finally paying off. She had starved my daughter and poisoned my brain for nearly a year, and the massive $80 million finish line was finally falling into her lap. But she was a master manipulator, and she recovered her composure with stunning speed. The flash of greed vanished instantly, replaced by wide, teary eyes and overwhelming humility. "Oh, Harrison," she gasped, theatrically pressing her hands against her chest. "I could never accept that. That money belongs to Maya's legacy." "Exactly," I pleaded, playing the desperate fool. "And no one could honor her legacy better than you. You pour your heart into the foundation. You're building rehab centers, funding youth programs. If I keep that money, I'll just let it rot in an offshore account. I want you to have it. I want you to take over the medical power of attorney, manage my private affairs, and use the LSM trust to change the world. Please, Victoria, let me sign those papers. Let me finally rest in peace." She let out a long, heavy, dramatic sigh, acting as if she were reluctantly accepting a massive burden purely out of love. "If that is truly what you need to find peace, Harrison, I will do it. I will carry this burden for you. But we should handle the final paperwork quietly. If we do this at the corporate headquarters, the financial media will hear rumors of the massive transfer, and the paparazzi will swarm. I want to protect your privacy. We will meet tomorrow night at my foundation office after all the staff have gone home. Just you, me, and the legal documents. It will be peaceful and completely private." I nodded meekly, giving her a fragile, grateful smile. "Thank you, Victoria. Tomorrow night is perfect." She kissed me again, her lips feeling as cold as dry ice, then walked back to her seat to finish her wine. She was celebrating her final victory. She fully believed I was voluntarily walking into the slaughterhouse. The following afternoon, the sky over Chicago was covered in a heavy, suffocating layer of gray clouds, signaling that a violent storm was about to hit. I drove my car to an empty parking garage in the industrial outskirts of the city. Rex Carter was waiting for me in the deep shadows of the concrete building, next to an unmarked black tactical van. We exchanged no verbal greetings. We both knew how incredibly serious the next few hours were. Rex opened the back door of the van and signaled for me to step inside. He reached into a gear bag and pulled out a custom, ultralight Kevlar vest. It was designed to be completely invisible under my tailored suit jacket, but dense enough to stop a bullet. I silently strapped the vest tight against my chest. Next, Rex handed me a heavy, brushed steel wristwatch. The internal mechanics had been completely replaced by a localized signal jammer. I silently fastened the cold metal clasp onto my left wrist, prepared for a brutal war. The time had finally arrived. The drive to the Foundation headquarters was a blur of rain-washed streets and flashing traffic lights. The heavy gray clouds that had been threatening the city all afternoon finally broke, releasing a torrential downpour that pounded violently against my car's windshield. The rhythmic slapping of the wipers was the only sound in the cabin. I gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, feeling the heavy weight of the concealed Kevlar vest pressing against my ribs, the cold metal signal jammer tightly fixed to my left wrist. I pulled the car into the Foundation's private underground parking garage. The garage was completely empty. The regular office staff had gone home hours ago, a move Victoria had intentionally cleared to ensure absolute, incontestable privacy for her final, lethal financial transaction. I parked, took one final deep breath to steady my racing heart, and walked into the damp, echoing concrete cavern. I walked toward the private executive elevator, forcing my shoulders to slump, allowing my pace to shrink into the fragile, hesitant shuffle of a broken, grieving old man. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor. The sensation of rising felt like slowly, painfully descending into a crypt. The doors opened, revealing the dimly lit, perfectly appointed reception area of the Foundation. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I walked down the long, empty hallway toward Victoria's private executive suite. The silence in the building was absolute, but beneath that silence, I could feel a dark, suffocating energy radiating from the walls. I knew exactly what was waiting for me. I walked to the heavy oak double doors of her office and pushed them open. The room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of designer desk lamps, intentionally crafted to create an inviting and secure atmosphere. Victoria sat behind her massive glass desk, wearing a tailored black dress, projecting an aura of sorrowful and professional grace. Standing directly behind her, hidden in the deep shadows of the corner, was Mateo Vargas. He wore a dark suit, thick arms crossed over his chest, his eyes locked onto me with the cold, dead stare of a top-tier predator. I crossed the threshold into the room. Vargas moved immediately. He emerged from the dark corner with a terrifying, silent speed, walked behind me, and grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak door. He pulled the door shut. The sharp, heavy click of the deadbolt sliding into place pierced the quiet room like a gunshot. The trap was officially sprung. I stood in the center of the room, looking around with eyes widened in a near-perfectly forged state of confusion. I clutched the lapels of my suit jacket, allowing my hands to shake slightly. Victoria rose from her chair, circled the glass desk, and wore a look of the utmost angelic compassion on her face. She reached out and took my trembling hands. Her touch felt like pure poison against my skin. "Harrison, my dear," she whispered, her voice soft and soothing. "You've made it through the storm. I am incredibly proud of you for taking this brave step today. I know this must be deeply painful for you, but you are doing the right thing for Maya's legacy." I nodded weakly, letting a ragged breath escape my lips. "I just want it to be over, Victoria," I whispered, staring at the floor. "I just want to find some peace." She gently guided me toward the luxury leather chair placed directly in front of her desk. "Sit," she urged softly. "Everything is perfectly prepared." I sank heavily into the chair, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. I glanced nervously at Vargas, who had returned to his position in the shadowy corner of the room. His thick hands rested casually above his hips, intentionally close to the bulge of the weapon concealed in the holster under his suit jacket. Victoria returned to her seat and gracefully pushed a massive, intimidating stack of legal documents across the sleek glass desktop. The pages were perfectly arranged, filled with dense, baffling corporate legalese designed to transfer the entire $80 million Alessum trust under her absolute, uncontested control. Placed carefully at the top of the signature line was a heavy, silver-capped Montblanc fountain pen. It was the exact same pen I had seen on her desk the day I discovered the hidden switch for the bookshelf. Seeing it, I heard the sound of blood roaring in my ears. I slowly reached out, picked up the silver pen, and felt its cold, heavy weight in the palm of my hand. My fingers hovered inches above the signature line. Victoria leaned forward, her deep eyes locked entirely onto the nib, her breathing hitching slightly in her throat. The raw, unfiltered greed in her gaze was absolutely terrifying. She was practically tasting the money. I lowered the pen, touching the silver nib to the thick white paper, and then I stopped abruptly. I allowed my hand to tremble violently, causing the fountain pen to slip from my grip and clatter loudly onto the glass desktop. "I can't see the fine print," I muttered, patting the pockets of my jacket with frantic, uncoordinated movements. "My reading glasses. I need my reading glasses." Victoria's jaw tightened imperceptibly, a microscopic crack in her perfect facade. "Of course, darling," she said. Her voice was laced with carefully suppressed impatience. "Take your time." I pulled the silver-rimmed glasses from my chest pocket, fumbled clumsily with the hinges for a few seconds, and slowly slid them onto my face. I picked up the heavy documents, held them close to my eyes, and began to read. I didn't skim the paragraphs. I read every line with a painfully deliberate slowness. I was counting the seconds in my mind, calculating the precise time Rex and his elite tactical team needed to climb the exterior wall of the building during the downpour. I knew they were currently maneuvering on the wet, dangerous roof, securing their silent ropes directly above the massive architectural skylight that dominated the ceiling of Victoria's office. I had to keep the absolute attention of the two monsters in front of me entirely focused on the table, entirely away from the skylight above our heads. "Victoria, what exactly does Article 4, Section B mean?" I asked, pointing to the middle of the third page with a trembling finger. "It says, the designated charitable executor assumes full discretionary distribution privilege." "Does this mean the board has to vote on how Maya's funds are used?" Victoria let out a slow, constrained breath, forcing a tight smile onto her face. "It doesn't, Harrison," she explained softly. "It means I have sole authority to distribute funds immediately, without waiting for bureaucratic board approval. It allows us to help children in need immediately, just as Maya would have wanted." I nodded slowly, turning to the next page, letting the silence stretch out indefinitely until it became physically painful. "And what about the international tax liability regarding offshore accounts?" I muttered, squinting at a long block of dense text. "My accountant usually handles these specific offshore transfers." "Are you absolutely certain the wording here protects the principal from federal tax penalties?" Behind me, I heard the heavy sound of leather creaking. Vargas was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His patience was evaporating rapidly. Victoria looked up at Vargas, gave him a sharp warning look, and then turned her sweet, toxic smile back to me. "My legal team has reviewed every syllable, darling," she assured, her voice dropping into a superior, soothing cadence. "The capital is protected, completely exempt from federal tax. You don't need to worry about any of these mundane corporate details. This is exactly why you are signing power of attorney. You are handing the burden to me, so you can finally rest in peace. Please, Harrison, just sign the final page." I ignored her plea and turned to the 5th page of the lengthy contract. I traced the text with my index finger, muttering under my breath as if struggling to understand the complex legal terminology. I began to ramble incoherently about Maya. I talked about her childhood, the summers we spent in Montana, intentionally weaving nonsensical, nostalgic memories into my questions about the contract. I asked Victoria if she remembered the color of Maya's favorite bicycle, tying the absurd question to the funding of the youth programs proposed in the document. I was intentionally playing the part of a deeply confused, completely shattered old man drowning in an ocean of grief and dementia. The atmosphere in the locked office became incredibly toxic. The air felt thick and heavy, charged with suppressed violence. Vargas let out a low, aggressive growl from the dark corner of the room. "We don't have all night for you to reminisce, old man," he roared, his thick cartel accent piercing his refined corporate facade. "Just sign these damn papers so we can all go home." Victoria sprang from her chair, her mask finally slipping. "Mateo, enough," she snapped, her voice as crisp as a whip. "Show my husband some respect." I looked up at Vargas, perfectly feigning sheer terror, widening my eyes as I shrank back into the luxury leather chair. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling violently. "I just want to make sure I do the right thing for my little girl. I know she would want everything to be absolutely perfect." Vargas took 2 large, threatening steps toward the glass desk, his steps heavy with menace, his hand resting on the pistol grip peeking out from the holster concealed under his suit jacket. He didn't want to play games anymore. I lowered my gaze back to the documents, gripping the silver Montblanc pen with sweating fingers. The clock inside me was screaming. Rex needed exactly 90 seconds to position his tactical team above the skylight and trigger the localized EMP generator. I had dragged out this agonizing charade for exactly 85 seconds. The crushing pressure in the room was reaching an absolute breaking point. I could almost feel the silent, lethal presence of the former Navy SEALs hovering just inches above the rain-lashed glass ceiling directly over our heads. Victoria was standing right beside me, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into the soft leather of my chair, completely oblivious to the tactical strike about to unfold. "Sign, Harrison," she commanded, her voice abandoning the sweet facade to reveal the cold, antisocial monster lurking beneath. I lifted the heavy silver pen and pressed the metal nib firmly into the black ink on the signature line, waiting for the silent vibration from the hidden jammer strapped to my wrist. The heavy pen remained perfectly still against the pristine white paper. A small, dark ink blot began to seep into the thick parchment, marking the exact second my entire world was about to change. Deep beneath the tailored fabric of my suit jacket, the hidden device on my wrist gave a short, sharp pulse. 90 seconds were up. Rex and his tactical team were in position. This agonizing farce was finally over. I didn't rush, I didn't panic, I simply stopped pretending. I lifted the heavy silver fountain pen from the document and laid it gently on the glass desktop with a soft, definitive click. The meticulously calculated tremor in my hand vanished instantly, replaced by rock-solid stillness. I let my hunched shoulders drop, tilted my neck slightly, and straightened my spine. The frail, completely shattered widower evaporated from the room entirely. I leaned back into the plush leather chair, crossed my legs, and projected the casual, dominant authority of a man who had spent 4 decades crushing corporate competitors and building an empire. I looked up. I didn't look at the dangerous cartel hitman lurking in the shadows. I locked my gaze directly onto Victoria. The sweet, condescending sympathy in her gaze wavered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off instantly. "I am not signing anything until I see my beautiful daughter, Victoria." My voice was no longer the fragile, trembling whisper of the defeated old man. It was a cold, resonant command forged in the fire of absolute certainty and righteous rage. The sentence bounced off the soundproof walls of the executive suite, shattering the suffocating tension like a physical blow. The entire room seemed to freeze instantly. The temperature plummeted. The silence that followed wasn't the quiet anticipation of a business deal closing. It was the deafening dead air of a trap being suddenly flipped upside down. Victoria's hand froze, hovering awkwardly over the scattered legal documents. The confusion in her deep eyes mutated rapidly. I watched the suite, charitable mask she had worn for 8 months dissolved completely. The angelic warmth faded from her face, leaving behind the coarse, jagged edges of pure, unadulterated malice. Her eyes, usually so vibrant and expressive, turned completely dead. They were shark-like, flat and hollow, calculating the exact moment to attack the prey. Behind me, the shadows moved violently. The tailored fabric of a suit jacket let out a heavy rasp, followed by the sharp, terrifying metallic slide of a weapon being drawn. Mateo Vargas moved with the lethal speed of a seasoned executioner. He stepped out of the dark corner, closing the distance between us in 2 large strides. I didn't even flinch when the cold, long barrel of a suppressed semi-automatic pistol was pressed firmly into the center of my forehead. The heavy steel edge of the suppressor dug into my skin, a reminder of the lethal reality I had volunteered to walk into. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, old man," Vargas growled. A low, menacing vibration resonated within my chest. "Pick up that pen. Sign these papers now, immediately." My eyes remained locked onto Victoria, completely ignoring the cartel cleaner with a loaded weapon pressed against my skull. "You have always been incredibly predictable, Victoria," I said, my tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You thought you could break me with grief. You thought you could bend me to your will with sedatives. You genuinely thought you were the smartest person in the room, but you made one fatal mistake. You forgot who created the wealth you were so desperate to steal. You forgot exactly who I am." Victoria let out a sharp, humorless laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound, completely devoid of joy. She slowly placed both hands back onto the glass desktop, her fingertips hovering delicately near the edge of her glowing digital tablet. "You are incredibly stupid, Harrison," she replied, her voice abandoning that melodic quality and adopting a flat, antisocial cadence. "I don't know how you managed to clear the fog of the medication, and frankly, I don't care. You are sitting in my office. You are surrounded by soundproof walls. My associate has a suppressed weapon aimed directly at your brain. You have absolutely zero leverage here. You will either sign the power of attorney or Mateo will stain my expensive rug with your blood, and I will forge your signature myself." I laughed. It was a cold, humorless expression that mirrored her dead, fish-like eyes. "You won't forge a single thing," I countered calmly. "Because if I don't walk out of this building alive, my lead legal team has explicit, written instructions to automatically liquidate the LSM Trust and donate every cent to a federal cancer research center. That money will be permanently locked into a charitable escrow account within 10 minutes of my death. You will get nothing, and your cartel friends in the South will hold you completely responsible for their lost capital." Victoria stared at me, her brain racing to process the tactical shift. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She knew I possessed the corporate infrastructure capable of executing that exact contingency plan. She slowly moved her hands away from the legal documents and reached for a heavy, decorative brass pen holder sitting near her computer monitor. I had assumed it was just an expensive paperweight. I was wrong. "I don't have time to play pathetic corporate chess games with you, Harrison," she stated coldly. "You want to see your daughter? Fine. I will show you exactly what is at stake." Victoria grabbed the base of the brass pen holder and twisted it sharply to the right. A heavy, mechanical clack echoed from the far wall of the office, the vibration traveling through the floor. The massive floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelf, filled with thick legal tomes and decorative artifacts, let out a loud, groaning sound. I watched with grim fascination as the entire structure smoothly unlocked from the wall and began to slide backward along a set of hidden industrial tracks. The bookshelf parted like heavy theater curtains, revealing the dark, horrific secret Victoria had hidden behind it. The hidden panic room was suddenly exposed to the warm light of the executive suite. The air inside the hidden compartment was visibly colder, spilling out into the office like icy mist. The blinding, stark white walls of the soundproof cell were illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights mounted firmly to the reinforced ceiling. And there, sitting on a thin, stained mattress, was Maya. My breathing caught painfully in my throat. Seeing her through the digital screen of the stolen surveillance feed was painful, but seeing her in reality breathing the same air was a profound physiological shock. She looked incredibly frail. Her clothes were baggy and unwashed. Her beautiful face was pale, pulled tight by severe malnutrition and constant psychological intimidation. The heavy steel chain securing her ankle to the floor clattered loudly. She slowly raised her hands to shield her eyes from the painfully harsh glare, shivering violently. Seeing her, my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. Maya, my brilliant, vibrant daughter, had been reduced to a fragile ghost, locked like an animal in this cold, sterile box beneath my feet. A suppressed, agonizing sob tore itself from my throat. I lunged forward, every instinct in my body screaming to rip that heavy steel door off its hinges and strangle the life out of those who had put her inside. But Vargas was much faster. He smashed the heavy steel suppressor of his pistol violently against the bridge of my nose, snapping my head back and forcing me violently back into the leather chair. The cold metal left a stinging bruise against my skin. "Stay still, old man," Vargas warned, his voice low and vibrating with absolute lethal intent. "One twitch, one sudden breath, and I will splatter your brains all over this expensive mahogany desk." Victoria walked slowly around the desk, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. She moved with the predatory grace of a spider trapping a fly in its web. She stood directly between me and the open vault door, completely blocking my view of my weeping daughter. A chilling, triumphant smile bloomed across her face, completely devoid of any human empathy. She had finally discarded the heavy, exhausting mask of the grieving, supportive wife. The woman standing before me was a hollow, calculating monster, driven entirely by antisocial greed and pure survival instinct. "Did you really think you understood this game, Harrison?" she sneered, her voice echoing with a dark, captivating cruelty. "You thought I was just another greedy socialite looking for a comfortable retirement fund. You thought I married you because I wanted a massive mansion and a platinum credit card. You have always been so incredibly arrogant, completely blind to the world that operates outside your pathetic corporate bubble." She leaned against the desk, placing her hands flat on the glass, bringing her face uncomfortably close to mine. "I didn't target you for your wealth, Harrison. I targeted you out of absolute, terrifying necessity. 5 years ago, I made a catastrophic error in judgment. I invested heavily in a shadow development project operating in Sinaloa. I borrowed $50 million from the group Mateo represents. When federal authorities raided the compound and confiscated the assets, my cartel investors didn't write it off as a business loss. They demanded the principal back plus an astronomical premium. They gave me an ultimatum. Find the money or they would systematically dismantle me piece by piece. I stared at her, feeling the cold, sickening truth washing over me. "You were always just a stepping stone, Harrison," she whispered, her black eyes shimmering with malicious delight. "You were nothing but an incredibly convenient, highly liquid asset waiting to be harvested." The sheer scale of her deception was suffocating. I struggled to process the timeline she was laying out. 5 years ago, my first wife, Eleanor, was still alive. Eleanor was healthy, vibrant, and incredibly protective of our family assets. She would have never allowed Victoria anywhere near me. My brain violently connected the missing pieces. I looked up at Victoria, and a terrifying realization froze my blood. Eleanor didn't die of a sudden neurological failure, I said, my throat tightening, my voice trembling with raw, unfiltered fear. Victoria tilted her head back and let out a bright, genuine laugh. It was the most disturbing sound I had ever heard. It took you so long to figure that out, she mocked, shaking her head in dramatic disappointment. Your brilliant doctors were completely baffled. They called it a rapid, aggressive autoimmune degeneration. They tested her for every rare disease on the planet, but they never tested for a custom synthetic neurotoxin synthesized in a cartel lab. She began to pace slowly across the expensive rug, savoring every syllable of her confession. It took me nearly 10 months to kill her, Harrison. I had to be incredibly patient. I slipped the chemical compound into her morning tea, her wine glass, the vitamins she took every day. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, watching her slowly suffocate inside her own failing body. I cried at her funeral, then waited exactly 6 months before, coincidentally, bumping into a lonely, grieving widower at that charity gala. You were so desperate for companionship, so desperate for a comforting hand to hold in the dark. You were practically begging me to take control of your life. A guttural growl gathered deep in my chest. I wanted to kill her. I wanted to wrap my hands around her throat and squeeze the final breath out of her life. But Vargas pressed the pistol harder against my skull, and with a sharp, terrifying metallic click, he pulled back the hammer. "Sit," Vargas commanded. Victoria turned her attention back to the open vault door. Maya was curled up on the mattress, hands pressed tightly over her ears, crying uncontrollably as she listened to the monster casually confess to murdering her mother. Your daughter, however, was a completely unexpected complication, Victoria continued, glaring at the shivering girl in the cell. She was always far too curious. 8 months ago, Maya broke into my private study while I was hosting a charity luncheon. She was trying to find financial discrepancies in the foundation accounts, but she found something much worse. She found the encrypted digital receipts for the chemical compounds I bought from my cartel partners. She printed them out. She was packing her bags, ready to go straight to the federal authorities. Victoria walked into the cold panic room. Maya scrambled backward, pressing her thin shoulders against the stark white wall, her eyes wide with absolute terror. Victoria bent down, grabbed a handful of my daughter's messy hair, and dragged her forward roughly. Maya let out a sharp, agonizing scream, struggling weakly under her ironclad grip. I couldn't just kill her, Victoria explained, dragging Maya toward a heavy steel pedestal mounted near the entrance of the vault. A sudden, violent death would have triggered an automatic autopsy and a massive police investigation. So, I fabricated a tragic story of drug relapse. I bribed a corrupt private clinic to verify her fictional medical records. I locked her in this box and told you she ran away. I leveraged your own fatherly guilt to completely paralyze your judgment while I methodically drained your accounts. Victoria forced Maya to kneel before the steel pedestal. Embedded in the center of the metal console was a sleek, black biometric scanner. The LSM Trust is incredibly well defended, Harrison, Victoria said, her voice returning to that cold, antisocial cadence. The primary security protocol requires dual authentication. It requires your absolute legal power of attorney, which you are going to sign right now, and it also requires direct biometric confirmation from the primary beneficiary. She roughly pressed Maya's trembling right hand against the biometric scanner. The console immediately emitted 2 beeps. Now, sign the final waiver, or Damien will put a bullet in your head, and then I will poison this girl with gas. The metallic click of the pistol hammer locking into place echoed in the cold air spilling from the open vault. Mateo Vargas stood motionless, his black eyes devoid of any human hesitation. The heavy steel suppressor remained pressed tight against the skin of my forehead. I could feel the cold, merciless circle of the gun barrel digging directly into the bone. Most men would have broken right there. Most men would have grabbed that heavy silver pen, dropped to their knees, and abandoned their entire corporate empire just to buy one more breath. But I was no longer a common man. I was a father who had walked through the darkest, most agonizing abyss of grief and returned with a heart forged from absolute steel. I didn't look at the gun. I didn't look at the armed cartel cleaner holding it. I looked past them both, focusing the entirety of my existence on the fragile, shivering girl kneeling on the cold floor of the panic room. Maya was staring at me. Her wide, terrified eyes were silently pleading with me to save her. But beneath the facade of absolute terror, I saw the flickering, indestructible embers of my daughter's spirit. I saw the brilliant, resilient young woman who had bravely tried to expose a murderer. I maintained eye contact with her, refusing to let panic seep into my expression. I needed to convey silently to her that this endless nightmare was finally coming to an end. My expression softened, sending a silent, unconditional wave of love and absolute reassurance to the other side of the room. I kept my posture incredibly rigid, conveying a quiet, unbreakable strength. I watched as the rhythm of her frantic, shallow breathing began to slow by a tiny fraction. She saw the subtle change in me. She saw the corporate titan who had coldly conquered every opponent he had ever faced. Not the weeping, defeated ghost Victoria had been parading around the estate for the last 8 months. I slowly shifted my attention back to the monster, standing near the biometric scanner. Victoria was breathing heavily, her chest heaving with predatory anticipation. She was fully expecting me to break. She was expecting me to weep and beg her to spare my daughter's life. Instead, I leaned back into the plush leather chair, casually folding my hands in my lap, completely ignoring the loaded weapon aimed directly at my skull. "Do you really believe this is going to work, Victoria?" I asked. My voice was surprisingly calm, resonating with a deep rhythm of authority that seemed to catch her completely off guard. "Do you genuinely believe you can wire $80 million into untraceable offshore cartel accounts, murder a respected corporate executive and his daughter in a downtown charity office, and walk away to enjoy your spoils?" "Sign the documents, Harrison," she commanded, the pitch of her voice rising as her perfect aristocratic veneer began to show severe cracks. I shook my head slowly, wearing an expression of incredibly mocking pity. "Your books were always incredibly sloppy, Victoria. It was the first thing I noticed when we got married. You have a remarkable talent for spending other people's money, but you have zero talent for covering your digital footprint. Did you genuinely think that while you were keeping me sedated with those meticulously prepared pills, my private financial team stopped monitoring the LSM trust? Did you think I didn't have algorithmic safeguards in place to track every unauthorized query against my personal legacy? I knew about your catastrophic shadow investments weeks ago. I know exactly how much you owe the Sinaloa Group. I know you are drowning in debt, and I know you are absolutely terrified." Vargas pressed the gun barrel harder against my forehead. "Shut up and pick up the pen," he roared, his finger tightening on the curved metal trigger. I didn't even look at him. "You hired a cartel cleaner to play the role of a glorified bodyguard," I continued, my gaze fixed ruthlessly on Victoria. "You brought an internationally wanted criminal into my highly scrutinized corporate circle. Did you genuinely think your brutal employers in the South would let you walk away and enjoy the remaining $30 million of my trust fund? You are a massive liability to them, Victoria. The exact moment that money clears on their hidden ledgers, Mateo isn't going to politely escort you to a private jet. He is going to put a bullet in the back of your head and dump your body into an industrial incinerator. You are not a brilliant strategic mastermind. You are a desperate, stupid amateur playing a dangerous game far beyond her intellectual capacity." The truth of my cruel, unapologetic words hit her like a physical blow. Her face turned a deep, bruised red with sudden, unbridled rage. The meticulous, calculating control she had maintained for years shattered completely. She let out a a raw, guttural sound of pure, helpless frustration, and completely abandoned the biometric pedestal. She walked aggressively back to her massive glass desk, her expensive heels pounding heavily against the hardwood floor. She snatched the glowing digital tablet from its charging cradle, her hands shaking with uncontrollable fury. "You arrogant, pathetic old fool," she spat, holding the tablet high so I could see the screen clearly. In the dark, atmospheric light of the office, the app interface was glowing brightly. Directly in the center of the high-definition display was a large red pulse icon controlling the lethal mechanical ventilation override directly connected to the walls of the cell. My internal clock was ticking mercilessly. The 90 seconds Rex explicitly demanded were rapidly evaporating. The EMP was imminent. I just needed to hold her undivided attention for even a few more seconds. I had to ensure she didn't press that screen before the military-grade pulse permanently severed the digital connection. "You think you've defeated me?" Victoria screamed, her voice echoing wildly off the soundproof walls. "You think your brilliant corporate safeguards mean anything in this locked room? The ultimate power is in my hands. I control who breathes and who suffocates. I spent a year planning this exact moment. I slowly poisoned your first wife. I locked your precious daughter in a freezing cage. I destroyed your brain until you were weeping and begging me to take your money. And now you sit there, looking down the barrel of a gun and trying to lecture me on strategy." I remained completely unmoved, my face like a cold, unbreakable stone mask. "You are stalling, Victoria," I teased softly. "You are stalling because you know I am absolutely correct. You know that the moment you lose your utility, the cartel is going to execute you." She let out an incredibly angry scream, completely losing her composure. She held the tablet higher, her thumb hovering just millimeters above the red pulse execution command. "Mateo, cock the hammer," she commanded, her voice completely out of control. Vargas manually pulled the heavy slide of the pistol back a fraction of an inch, ensuring a lethal round was perfectly chambered and ready to fire. The metallic sound of friction was deafening in the confined space. He shifted his fighting stance, stabilizing himself to absorb the coming recoil. "I am done with your arrogant corporate preaching," Victoria yelled, stepping around the desk and standing directly beside the cartel cleaner. She pointed the glowing tablet at me, her thumb shaking violently on the smooth glass screen. "You have exactly 10 seconds to pick up that silver fountain pen and sign the final documents." My internal countdown reached the final 5 seconds. 10 seconds, Harrison," Victoria screamed, her beautiful face twisting into a terrifying mask of absolute, desperate insanity. "Sign it now." 4. I moved my gaze past the lethal gun barrel, past the glowing digital tablet, and fixed my eyes firmly on my beautiful daughter's terrified eyes for one last time. 9, Victoria shouted, her voice completely cracking. 8, 7, 3. I slowly took my hands from my lap, placing my palms flat against the soft leather armrests of the chair, allowing my muscles to prepare for a sudden, explosive shift in gravity. 6, 5. If you don't sign that paper, I will press this button and I will watch that girl suffocate to death, she threatened, her thumb brushing the edge of the lethal red icon. 2. I took one deep, steadying breath, drawing the cool, climate-controlled air deep into my lungs. Sign it, she commanded for the final time, her voice reaching the hysterical, frenzied peak of madness. 1, 0. I don't think I will, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, toxic air of the executive office like a freshly sharpened blade. I didn't blink. I didn't move my head away from the cold steel of the heavy suppressor pressed tight against my skin. Instead, I calmly moved my left hand from the armrest of the luxury leather chair and rested my thumb against the edge of my brushed steel wristwatch. I looked Victoria directly in the eyes, watching as the absolute certainty of her impending victory radiated from her beautiful yet monstrous face. She fully believed she had won. She fully believed my mind had been destroyed and my daughter was about to die. I pressed the button hidden on the side of the metal casing. The mechanical click was completely silent, swallowed by the heavy tension in the room, but the reaction was instantaneous and devastating. The localized EMP detonated. There was no massive fireball, no deafening explosion, no concussive shockwave that threw us across the room. Instead, it was an invisible, high-energy pulse of electromagnetic energy that instantly stripped the life from every microchip within a 50-foot radius. The death of the electronic world that followed was profound and immediate. The designer desk lamps illuminating the office in warm gold died with one crisp, synchronized pop. The massive computer monitor on the glass desk sparked violently and died, the screen fading to a dull, lifeless gray. The gentle hum of the climate control system stopped abruptly, leaving a thick, suffocating silence. Even the faint electrical buzz of the digital lock on the heavy oak door vanished. The transition from a brightly lit, high-tech executive suite to an absolute, pitch-black tomb took less than a tenth of a second. The sudden darkness was completely disorienting, like a heavy physical curtain being violently dropped and instantly depriving me of my sight. For the hovering time of a single heartbeat, the room was plunged into a vacuum of absolute sensory deprivation. Then the panic broke out. Through the incredibly dense void of the darkness, I heard the frantic, desperate sound of human flesh slamming violently against smooth glass. Victoria was completely unable to cope with the sudden loss of tactical advantage. Her meticulously calculated extortion plot relied entirely on absolute control of the digital environment. And now, that environment was completely dead. She blindly poked at the unresponsive screen of the tablet with trembling fingers, desperately trying to force the fried circuits to execute her command. Her breathing completely lost its controlled, antisocial rhythm, replaced by rapid, shallow inhalations caused by pure, unadulterated terror. "The screen is dead," she screamed, her voice echoing harshly off the soundproof walls of the executive suite. "The entire system is completely unresponsive. I pressed the button, but nothing happened." The sheer panic in her voice was music to my ears. The flawless, lethal trap she had spent 8 months building had just been shattered by a single pulse of invisible energy. She struck the dead glass more forcefully, the frantic, repetitive tapping becoming the pathetic rhythm of her rapidly unraveling sanity. She realized with extreme terror that she had completely lost the $80 million prize. And worse, she had lost the ability to execute the girl in the cell. "Get the power back on," she ordered into the empty darkness, screaming desperately as if her aristocratic willpower could miraculously force completely destroyed microprocessors back to life. But the tablet in her trembling hands was nothing more than a useless piece of dead glass. Beside her, Damien made the lethal conditioned reflex of a professional cartel cleaner. He didn't waste precious breath screaming at the darkness like Victoria. A localized power outage was not a simple municipal blackout. His highly attuned combat instincts instantly recognized the gravity of the tactical shift. He knew they were in an incredibly dangerous situation. The heavy steel barrel of the suppressed pistol was moved rapidly away from my head. Damien instinctively backed away, pressing his broad shoulders against the nearest solid wall to minimize his exposure in the pitch-black room. He was completely blind in this windowless executive suite, forced to rely on hearing and spatial memory to survive the impending assault. He began to issue rapid-fire, aggressive instructions to Victoria in a harsh, whispered Spanish, demanding she drop the useless device and get down behind the heavy mahogany desk. But before Damien succeeded in adjusting his vision to the bottomless darkness, and before Victoria understood the urgent instruction, the reinforced architectural skylight directly above the center of the office collapsed violently. This giant sheet of bulletproof, thick glass had been quietly cut and prepared by Rex's team during my excruciatingly long negotiation. Now it crashed inward with a catastrophic, absolutely deafening impact. Hundreds of thick, jagged shards of tempered glass poured down from the high ceiling like a violent crystal hail, cruelly smashing into the expensive furniture and tearing deep into the plush carpet. The sudden, violent rupture of the skylight tore through the suffocating silence of the room, replaced by the terrifying sound of falling debris and the whistling of the gale-force winds pouring in from the stormy night sky above our heads. I executed the movement exactly as I had trained for in the event of an absolute tactical breach. I threw my body hard against the metal base of the plush leather chair, burying my face deep into my crossed arms, and squeezed my eyes shut. Before the last few shards of thick glass hit the ground, 3 compact metal canisters dropped rapidly through the hole in the roof, smashing hard into the ruined carpet. Damien blindly aimed his weapon toward the shattered skylight, desperately trying to lock onto a target in the pitch-black space. He didn't even have the fraction of a second needed to pull the trigger. The military-grade flashbangs detonated simultaneously. The enclosed, soundproof walls of the executive office amplified the explosive power tenfold. A blinding, searing, pure white flash instantly annihilated the darkness, burning through the blackness with an incredibly painful intensity. It was much brighter than staring directly into the core of the noonday sun. Microseconds later, the concussive shockwave hit. It was a giant, solid wall made of pure kinetic sound waves that hammered violently against my chest, completely destroying my sense of balance. Even though I had my hands pressed tightly over my ears, the noise was absolutely paralyzing. The sustained, ear-splitting ringing instantly flooded my brain, completely drowning out the terrified screams of my wife, as well as the heavy, dull thud of the cartel cleaner hitting the floor. Flashbangs are designed to completely overload the sensory processing centers of the human brain, inducing instantaneous, paralyzing vertigo and absolute blindness. Victoria and Damien were completely incapacitated, their nervous systems violently scrambled by the pure, concussive force of the pyrotechnic devices. Through the ringing and the piercing afterimages burning my retinas, I felt the heavy vibration of tactical boots hitting the floorboards. Rex Carter and his elite tactical team descended through the shattered skylight, utilizing rappelling ropes to drop directly from the stormy night sky like fully armed shadows. This unprecedented, incredibly dangerous silent assault was executed to perfection, establishing absolute, incontestable control over the entire room within a matter of seconds. I pulled Maya tightly to my chest, feeling the violent tremors of her frail body subside in the safety of my embrace. I whispered into her hair, promising her that the endless nightmare was permanently over and that no one would ever hurt her again. Outside the shattered skylight, the sound of sirens rose from the distance, cutting sharply through the heavy storm. Rex and his tactical team quickly secured the perimeter of the executive suite as official reinforcements arrived, fully armed. I had already instructed my lead corporate attorney, John Prescott, to coordinate directly with local law enforcement while executing the silent raid. Hours earlier, John had submitted a mountain of damning evidence to the district attorney, detailing every fraudulent wire transfer, the dangerous cartel connections, and the completely fabricated medical records Victoria had used to keep my daughter hidden from the world. The heavy oak doors of the executive suite were suddenly kicked open. Dozens of heavily armed police officers surged into the dim room, their bright tactical flashlights piercing the residual smoke of the flashbangs. They found Victoria crumpled on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her wrists securely handcuffed with heavy, industrial-grade zip ties, her meticulously constructed empire completely reduced to ashes. Damien was hauled to his feet, his shattered arm dangling uselessly at his side, his face a grim mask of silent, desperate agony. As the police dragged the two criminals out of the ruined office and marched them down the lavish hallway, they were witnessed by the late-shift employees of her own charity foundation. The staff, who had been manipulated and used by Victoria to build her perfect facade of benevolence, watched in absolute, stunned silence as their angelic leader was paraded past them in cold, steel handcuffs. Her pristine public reputation was shattered forever in an instant. By the next morning, federal authorities had completely taken over the investigation. The FBI immediately froze Victoria's offshore accounts and began systematically dismantling the lethal cartel network she had foolishly entangled herself with. She faced multiple life sentences in a federal prison, completely isolated and universally reviled by the society she had once sought to conquer. But I didn't care about her impending trial. I didn't care about the massive media spectacle exploding around my family. My entire existence was focused on one singular, monumental goal: Maya's physical and mental recovery. I immediately liquidated that fraudulent charity foundation and tore the LSM Trust down to its very foundation. In its place, I established a real, heavily funded foundation dedicated entirely to the rescue and rehabilitation of victims of severe psychological and physical abuse. I made absolutely certain that the wealth Victoria had stolen was redirected to heal the very same traumas she had inflicted upon my child. Maya spent months in a highly specialized, secure rehabilitation facility, surrounded by the world's top trauma experts. It was a long, excruciatingly painful journey, but bit by bit, my beautiful daughter came back to me. Today, as I stand by the giant glass window of my corner office, overlooking the massive global logistics empire I built from scratch, I feel a profound sense of peace. The corporate legacy, the billions of dollars, the vast fleets of ships and aircraft, none of it truly matters to me anymore. The only legacy of true value is the brilliant, resilient young woman standing beside me, fully prepared to take the reins when the time is truly right. We walked through the burning flames of hell together, and because of it, we have emerged stronger, completely united, and utterly prepared to conquer whatever unknown future lies ahead. I looked deeply into her beautiful, smiling face, with the absolute, unshakable conviction that our enduring and deeply connected bloodline has successfully defeated the darkest evil of humanity forever. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators don't hide in the shadows. They disguise themselves as the people you trust, sitting right across from you at your dinner table. True power lies in far more than just physical strength. It lies in the cold, calculating patience required to outsmart those who underestimate you because of your age or your grief. Family is not just a title we give one another. It is defined by absolute loyalty, action, and truth. Never let your love blind your eyes to glaring red flags, and never underestimate the ruthless determination of a father protecting his own precious flesh and blood. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel right now so you never miss an update. Please leave a comment down below and tell me which city you are watching from today. I read every single comment, and I am genuinely grateful for your wonderful and continued support.